Hello and welcome to the new Pharma Insights Podcast by Reuters Events Pharma, where we'll be having real conversations with the leaders shaping the future of pharma today. I'm Jonathan Elliott, your host for this episode. Now, I was at the Reuters Events Pharma USA conference in Philadelphia not long ago, and one of the conversations that really stayed with me was with Erica Smith, Vice President of Value and Market Access at Chiesi Pharmaceuticals. I caught up with Erica for a quiet moment in the hubbub of the conference, and I wanted to hear from her about something that's genuinely close to her heart: how to embed health equity thinking into a product launch from day one, rather than bolting it on as an afterthought. Now, Erica comes from a deep commercial background. She started out as a sales rep and worked her way up through commercial leadership over more than 25 years. So she's someone who thinks about health equity not just as a moral imperative, but as a business case that you can actually put in front of a skeptical leadership team. We also got into how pharma companies navigate a volatile US policy environment when it comes to drug access and pricing, what it really means to operate as a certified B Corp, and whether companies without that structure can still do this effectively. Erica's view: they absolutely can. And as you'll hear, they have no excuse not to. So, Erica, thanks for joining us today. It's lovely to have you on the show. Just let's talk about the launch integration question. You've talked about embedding health equity thinking directly into a product launch rather than treating it as an add-on. What does that actually look like in practice? And what does a launch team need to do differently from day one?
Well, I think right now we're really thinking about what launch teams should do differently. And in the future, I hope we're thinking about what R&D teams are doing differently, because that's going to change the downstream impacts of what we're doing as a launch team. So the first thing that should happen is that patients should be involved as early as possible in clinical trials, because then we're able to uncover opportunities in drug development that we wouldn't have known about when we're just doing things the way that we always did it. But then once we do get to launch, even when we haven't had that patient voice early on, we are embedding health equity principles into the launch team. We have been looking at KPIs related to the launch, and then embedding those health equity principles into all of those, which means we're looking at patient advocacy, we're looking at patient voice, we're looking at what the launch KPIs are around access, not only access to medicines through payers, but also access to physicians, access to the providers, and thinking about how we can show up in the places where patients need the therapy more than others might, and really make it possible for us to make a win-win situation where providers and patients and our company are all winning.
Fantastic. Now, you come from a commercial background, sales rep all the way through to commercial leader. How do you make the business case for health equity investment to colleagues in leadership who are primarily focused on the numbers?
Yeah, well, for me, I've always thought it was pretty simple math. As you said, I was a sales rep, I was a sales manager, and now I'm the vice president of value and market access. Still, I am beholden to a number. And for me, health equity can be broken down in a very simple way when it comes to thinking about launch success. More patients get diagnosed, more patients have access to medicine, more patients have the education they need to stay adherent to medicine. So that math is pretty simple as far as I'm concerned. The other things that I think about that we've tied directly to launch KPIs are those things around how we're accessing the clinicians that are treating patients. And so when we can show up in communities before our drug is on the shelf in any pharmacy and really embed ourselves and co-create solutions, then we build relationships that are unlike others that have been built before. Again, I've been in this industry for over 25 years, most of it in a commercial function. And I have never had more access to providers than I have now when I'm just asking questions about who is not being treated, which patients aren't getting the help that they need, because our customers are looking at population health. Population health of course, continues to get better. And at some point you get to a place, especially in communities where overall people are doing pretty well, the only way to uncover ways to get even better is to really start desegregating that data. And when you show up in front of providers and you understand that, understand how they're being paid, understand how they're being measured, and have those types of conversations, you have access, which is the first step to the sale, of course.
Fantastic. Now, the US policy environment around drug access and pricing is particularly volatile right now. How do you plan a health equity strategy when the rules of the game keep changing? And how does what happens in the US ripple out globally?
Yeah, well, it is undoubtedly a very dynamic policy environment for sure. And the way that we've been thinking about it is how you can uncover opportunities that you wouldn't have had before if we weren't in these challenges. So for instance, we have found that in some teaching institutions where before we've had a hard time finding any way to work with providers, they're open to talking to industry in a way that they hadn't before because they're not getting the grants that they needed. So they're opening up their minds about ways that we can work together. And so that challenging environment and dynamic environment does present some opportunities. Also, as you think about the pricing dynamics and access and policy dynamics, things that are happening with the PBMs, our customers are being asked to change the way that they're approaching their work, which also gives us opportunities. So those are the things we're thinking about. We're looking for payers who, for instance, want an opportunity to do good while doing well along with us. And that ripples out across the global landscape in a lot of different ways. For us as a company, we are a global company. And so we've been able to think about shifting our health equity strategy to a true global lens, starting with the communities and building up while we're also taking a top-down approach. And so we've been able to replicate that across countries because what happens in the US, of course, does ripple out into the globe.
Well, health equity is one of those areas where people can talk a good game without actually really moving the needle.
Yeah.
So what does success really actually look like?
Yeah.
How do you measure it in a way that holds up to scrutiny?
Yeah. So I think you have to look at it through two lenses. And we have done that by developing frameworks to measure business impact, but also measure social impact. And so again, through a rigorous framework that's really embedded in the patient journey, we've done that. So when we think about how our communities are impacted, how providers are impacted, how patients are impacted, we're filtering it through that social lens to see how it matters not just to the health of an individual, but how that ripples out into their families, the places where they work, and their communities. But then we also do look at the business lens. And I mentioned this before, I have never found doors open so much before I started having these conversations about health equity over the last 3 years. And what I've found is that everyone from community health workers, community groups, payers, provider groups, hospital quality managers, they are showing up going, look, we know that you are a business. We're a business too. And we think that you can have a win-win here. And so it is in a world where there's a lot of greenwashing and a lot of, saying that you're going to do something that you don't really do. I think that those who have seen us show up in these conversations and really try to understand what's going on in their communities recognize that there's an opportunity where our company wins and the people that are living with the diseases in their communities and the providers are winning too.
Fantastic. The Chiesi operates as a benefit corporation, which is a pretty distinctive structure. Does that genuinely change how you approach health equity, or is it more of a cultural signal? And can companies without that structure do this as effectively?
Yes. To be short, but I think it's interesting that, as you said, the benefit corporation is very distinctive. Health equity is operationalized and embedded into our business because the Chiesi family really does believe in doing well by doing good. And then we go ahead a step further and have a B Corp come in to certify us. So we just were recertified for the third time with B Corp. And so it's really that measure that says, are you walking the talk? And so I think the way that we operationalize health equity within the framework of a benefit corporations really comes to life. And I believe that it's possible at any company if you have the leadership and the structure to support that. I recently tapped into some AI to try to understand how many pharmaceutical companies have the word patients in their value statements. And I just finally gave up because I wasn't going to find one that didn't. And so if that's really true, if we're really bringing medicines that meet unmet needs, and we're really very interested about helping patients, I don't think we're only interested in helping patients who have commercial insurance or patients who have income that allows them to pay for things out of pocket, or patients that only live in a certain area. And so I think that health equity is not only possible for any pharmaceutical company, it's an imperative.
Fantastic. Erica Smith from Chiesi, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Yep, my pleasure. Thank you.
Erica Smith there from Chiesi, talking to me at the Reuters Events Pharma USA conference in Philadelphia. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with friends and colleagues and be sure to catch our next edition, in which we'll be talking to Paul Burton, Chief Medical Officer at Amgen, about direct-to-consumer, health literacy, the role of AI in drug development, and much more. Join us then. But for now, goodbye.